Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. Welcome, everyone. It's Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish, here again to welcome you into the circle as we come together with all of our parts, with all that we have been, who we are now, and that which one day we will become. Today we're inviting not just a topic into the circle, but also an amazing, inspirational leader, teacher, healer, someone who has worked and lived many phases of their lives where they're always seeking truth. This person embodies that quest of truth and voice, the power of voice, unlike anyone that I have met in my life. So today, as we invite this amazing human being and spirit into this circle, we will also be talking about not just their creation story, but this little thing called coming out of the spiritual closet. So it is with great honor that we welcome into the circle today, Rose.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Although I feel like I haven't properly prepared my radio voice for this experience.
I think you're doing pretty good.
Thank you.
So, Rose, in your own words, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your creation story, and your story of coming out of the spiritual closet?
Wow. If my parents are to be believed, supposedly I was conceived in the ocean. I have quite a number of creation stories. I guess it depends on which version you want. I happen to like that particular beginning. It's very Aphrodite. But my creation story is inseparable from the land and the plants and the medicine of Central and Northern California and the Pacific Northwest of North America. And it's interesting that you said truth, because I feel like I've had a couple different experiences of coming out of the spiritual closet, which are very tied into my creation story, which I feel like is actually true if we're talking about any coming out of the closet. You have to do it over and over again in different contexts, around different people, depending on, what people will assume about you, given anything, how, their own perspective. And there was a point not too many years ago when I really had veered away from intentionally pursuing a lot of what I would consider my spiritual practices that feel very natural and cohesive to me, in terms of what fits my life, what fits my essence, what fits who I am, what feels right. And I went a lot deeper down the path of like evidence-based practice and being very skeptical and righteous. And I got a lot from that experience. But what actually eventually did pull me back to some things that felt right for me, despite the fact that I had people close in my life that had a lot of judgment and a lot of wounding really connected to spirituality and religion, which I realized I had taken on as my own far more than really belonged to me. And the reason I think it's interesting that we're talking about truth is because what I decided was that I would rather risk being delusional and seen as, an idiot and delusional and fooled and whatever, buying snake oil and crystals and woo-woo stuff, and maybe lose some people's respect it was worth it to me if there was a single door or wonder or mystery or magic or spirit or really anything outside of the knowing of the world that I already had. If a single door opened in my life to that experience, what would it really be worth that I was like, oh, I'm so smart. I wasn't fooled by all that crap. You know what I mean? But then I never saw through that crack in the door. I never saw, the worlds that exist within this one, which are not always like physical worlds. Sometimes they're just that wonder, that layer, that there are so many worlds within this world. And I have too much love for the vastness of experience to want to close those doors, which is what I did for a little while. And I think I needed that. But that was a really pivotal moment for me because I feel like I probably will never go back at this point. And it's part of what that paved the way, not really with concrete, that wouldn't be appropriate for this metaphor, but it's part of what paved the way for you and me to have a different type of connection more quickly. Because if I hadn't made that choice, you wouldn't have seen during our early connections my altars, my practices, or whatever, and may not have known, or maybe it would have taken longer to know that there were pieces of that you could bring into our relationship with each other, our connection. I'm going to leave it there. I feel like origin stories are big. I'm not going to go too deep into my origin story today, but it's a windy one.
All the good ones are winding ones. Now, you talk about having a vastness of experience and holding a place for wonder. You have had quite a vast experience, and I feel that your experience and the way that you teach people how to be is that experience of relationship. And your experience of relationship isn't just with human beings, but with Mother Earth. Can you tell us some of your early, vast experiences with her, with the plant kingdom, offerings of gratitude and thanks in your own way, and in the traditions that you were taught when you were young?
Yeah. So, something that I feel incredibly blessed by, actually, to have grown up when and where I did grow up, that is so different from a lot of what kids grow up with today, is even though my father was a programmer and we had technology in our school at a very young age, I didn't spend my childhood in front of a screen. I spent a lot of time outside. I had a lot of freedom. I spent a lot of time wandering. I remember I would walk the loop around the hill that one of our places was on when I was a young girl. And, I'd find antlers, shaken off of deer in this, the season. I don't even remember, spring, winter. I can't even remember. How sad is that? And it's the kind of thing now that I'm like, wow, where I live, where I used to live and grew up, that's not something you just find anymore. The population has gone up. People weren't going around looking for deer antlers to put on their bougie altar. You know what I mean? And the freedom that I had and the beauty of the environment that I lived in, nature was in many ways one of my refuges throughout my childhood. And part of that was because of where I lived. Part of that was intentional values and effort that my family put in. Part of that was my own natural tendency to just be drawn to that, to go into the lower field at my school and sit in the grass that was so tall that you couldn't see over it, and climb the trees, and, all of that. And it's just always been a place that I return to at any stage of healing in my life. Anytime I go through a breakup, anytime I'm going through like a major transition, nature is the place that I retreat to. A lot of solo time. And that may be why, for me, like, even though I love hiking in groups and connecting to other people who love it, solo nature time is it hits something for me that no amount of connective nature time with other people will ever touch, basically. I was raised in, felt like some very different but overlapping worlds growing up. And nature was definitely always a part of it in all of the worlds that I was in for the most part. But my home life was very different. It was more like, first of all, there was a lot of chaos and dysfunction there. But in terms of the nature, there was a lot of like scientific identification, a very like ecological kind of mindset. I was raised with the idea like you take only pictures and you leave only footprints, kind of like early leave no trace practices. And in my extended family, my connection to nature was also woven together with indigenous teachings. And some new age was mixed in there as well. And that had a very different feel to it. That was about asking permission before you touch things. That was about making offerings before you pick things. That was about speaking to things that I think even in an ecological viewpoint are not really seen as animate, embodied, spiritual beings. You might appreciate the geology of a rock, but you're not necessarily going to be like, don't touch it without permission. I remember the first time when I was a kid, I was connected to rocks and minerals at a very young age. Not just because I love them. There actually was a place in the county where I grew up that was called the Crystal Mine. And we would hike up. It wasn't a mine. It was just this open spot on a trail way up in the hills. And you could hike up. And right there, just coming out of the ground, were all of these tiny little quartz points. But then again, the connection was not to the mineral kingdom as like a spiritual kingdom, right? The first time that I ever really remember taking or really feeling like I heard a rock speak back to me in a very obvious way was surprising. I think some part of me still as a child was like I get it, but I may be partly playing along. And I remember picking up a rock. It belonged to like an uncle and aunt of mine and getting this immediate vibe, like put me down, like loud, not really like a voice, but just a knowing. And I was surprised. There's another funny story that now you will have heard several times and actually have repeated several times at this point, which is that when I was a very young child, and I was being taught that, you offer things like when you are building, especially like medicine or tools, or you're gathering herbs, or you're doing anything like that, you make an offering. Now I have been trained to sometimes make an offering of a song or things like that. But at the time, the standard offering that I was taught was tobacco. It was always tobacco. Well, as a child, you can imagine I was sort of stumped about where I was supposed to get tobacco. So a funny thing that I did was I would go around collecting cigarette butts and pulling any unburnt tobacco out of the cigarette butts into my pocket and just sort of having this little like tobacco stash basically. And my relatives were like, where is she getting this tobacco? I was like, I'm collecting cigarette butts. Like, small child, didn't have an idea that this would be like very unsanitary thing to do. But this is the same child, you understand, who one time didn't know what ticks look like. So on a really fun, like bug catching adventure, collected a whole jar of ticks. Probably scared the living bejesus out of my parents. I'm like, look, crawling with ticks, the whole jar. I caught ticks. So yeah, I found a way as a child. I usually would find a way.
Thank you for sharing all of these amazing stories of your childhood and your connection and how you grew up. Did you find that at one point in your life, and you kind of spoke about this, you kind of put those back in the closet? It seems that your journey with Mother Earth began at a very young age, and your relationship with her began at a very young age. Was there a time in your life where you left it, hid it, put it back? And then, if so, What or who called you back to relationship?
There's a couple key moments that stand out to me that were really significant turning points for me. One of them actually just being when I went to high school, because I grew up mostly, except for 1 year, like third or fourth grade. I grew up going to schools and living in a place where I was connected to nature every day. I spent time out in nature every day, even if it was like working in the garden at school. I built a sweat lodge at my school. But when I went to high school, that wasn't really an experience that was available to me. First of all, we had to commute to get to high school. There wasn't a high school near where I lived. So a lot of the time that I would have previously had, like to walk home along this beautiful trail or to go, just get my fix of solo time in this beautiful outdoor place, I was in a car instead. And there weren't really natural wild spaces that I could just like walk, past the football field. There's a beautiful open space that you can just sit in on your lunch breaks. Like, it was still a beautiful, beautiful place, but not a lot of connection to nature. That was a real challenge for me at that period. High school is also a very challenging period for me at home. And then, as you can imagine, like, hormones and puberty, and my body changed in ways that I felt like it had betrayed me, compared to how I felt growing up. And I developed pretty young, physically, in terms of, but it shifted in a way during high school that I felt like I didn't even know I recognized my body anymore. And to be in that environment and not have access to the things that I think really were so regulating and healthy for me in my connection with nature, which is so intertwined with my connection with spirit, was definitely challenging. That wasn't one where I feel like I chose to walk away from it or, anything like that. But that was a big turning point for me. Also, because at a certain age, I wasn't visiting my extended family as much anymore. And I didn't have those like 2 weeks in the summer where I would just like disappear into the north woods of the Pacific Northwest and swim in lakes with mica on the bottom and go sleep in teepees on my own and wander around property. And like, I didn't have that experience anymore. And, but I was still close to beautiful open spaces. I just didn't have the time because I was in a car. I was going to and from school. I was in special programs throughout high school that meant for all 4 years of my high school experience, I had an extra class period that happened outside of normal school hours. And I was also in theater and communications, and I did video production. I did integrated studies programs that we basically got additional credit because we did all of our normal classes plus a group-based learning project on top of it. And my education was very different because of that. It's shaped who I am completely. Like we're not going to go down that road because that's a long story, but high school was a major, major one for me. I think it really aggravated a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with at home, not having a lot of the coping spaces that I did, and my sort of spiritual and natural grounding. I think often what has brought me back to it, and I think this was true after high school, was some type of break, some type of struggle or challenge that kind of peaked and hit this really struggle point that I had to retreat back into nature, and that's just kind of what I do. Like when I'm going through a healing period, I often hermit away from people for a little while. I spend a lot of time on my own in nature. I do a lot of hiking. I do a lot of outdoor sports. And eventually I come back out socially and reconnect people and feel like I'm kind of coming out from that place again. For a while, my spiritual practices were there. I was very conscious of the fact that they were holding me and that my connection with nature was holding me. My connection with art has always held me as well and is deeply connected to my connection to spirit and intuition and creativity, creative energy. But I hit a turning point where I felt more and more that the space that I had taken from it, which really kind of escalated at its peak in the experience I shared earlier, which is I turned really far away from my spirituality and felt eventually that it wasn't right. I was taking on somebody else's story and somebody else's healing that they needed to do. It didn't belong to me. I definitely grew up with a distrust of organized religions and Christianity specifically, because I was raised very cognizant of the genocide of people on this continent. So I didn't really have a positive view of Christianity or any connected religions. It wasn't until well into my 20s that I felt like, oh, I met my first like really nice, very like liberally minded Christian person that I would consider a friend. Before that, I was just like, y'all are crazy and you kill people and you do it in the name of God and you're still doing it. So the wound that my partner at the time had was very connected to Christianity. But there was also something about the flavor of some of the ideas that I had taken on. I'm not just going to say from that person, but just some of the ideas that I had taken on that didn't belong to me, that really there was a lot of hypocrisy in it that sort of elevated like indigenous practices as these very like revered, but also sort of like exoticized, superhumanized things, while calling everything else delusional, which I think in reality, there probably wasn't really a separation. It probably was also that they considered those practices delusional as well, but they were just sort of like elevated as being like, oh, but we respect those because these people have been so harmed. And that helped me realize this is not my wound. And maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I'm an idiot for working with oracle cards and feeling connected to minerals and doing all these practices and whatever. And I'm willing to risk that. Like, I just knew that coming back to myself, which I was doing in many ways, that was a crucial part of it. That being said, that was also right at the beginning of another part of my life where I felt like I really was in the spiritual closet in a very intentional way, which was grad school. I was deep in that spiritual closet in my grad school program. There was only a few times I peeked out around like small tables of people like, yeah, when I go home, part of how I take care of myself is I blah, 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 blah. You know, people will be like, oh my God, me too. I have crystals in my bra right now. Stuff like that. And that coming out of that closet, I think has actually felt the most vulnerable, because I now have spent like a good chunk of money and a big chunk of my life in pursuit of this aspect of like my career, my education, my professional development. Here's all these colleagues that, while in academic spaces, there is this like respect for different ways of healing and all of these things, it still always felt a little bit like, yeah, like we respect it for those people out there because it like works for them. But like we kind of know in here that like that's just something we're like doing because like they're different and we got to let them have we have cultural humility, right? But not because we actually believe. And you could feel it in the way things are talked about in classrooms frequently. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I mean, it's not every classroom that can hold public health theory alongside like changing the world through traditional yogic path, for example, which I think can exist side by side. So that is a closet I am still coming out of. I'll be honest with you. Maybe not as intentionally now, but I'm still figuring out how to step into my spiritual power, in part because of that, and in part because a lot of what I was raised with did not belong to me. It doesn't belong to me. I don't teach 99% of what I was raised with because those were not practices that were taught to me from elders saying, you need to pass this on. You have permission to teach this, to share this. They were taught to me sometimes by elders, sometimes by family who had learned them from elders, usually not from the internet at that point, but figuring out how to come out of the spiritual closet without owning pieces that don't belong to me while acknowledging that they are they help to build the foundation of who I am and how I move through the world. It's complex, this is a complex time. And my relatives have freely admitted that like they probably were doing appropriation at times, that they look back and they're like, I don't know, that was kind of some, looking at it now through that lens, maybe, even though we had elders leading us, was that really appropriate? I don't know. So I don't know that I'm totally resolved about that, but I've done a lot of work around it with my teacher. It's helped me to figure out where to go at this point and what comes next. But I'm still coming out of that closet.
So there's two things that I want to kind of pull like taffy out of this conversation. You have spoken a lot about the need for solo time. And I think that's kind of a thing in many people's spiritual closets, that they think that they have to give, be out, and they don't know how to have solo time. So what are the practices that you're doing to try to do that, even amidst, a busy schedule or chaos? And again, it might not look like that 3-mile hike before, but what can people do? What can you teach people to do in small ways that they can adapt to this ever-changing world that we're in?
I mean, it really does depend so much on what you have access to, what's around you. When are the moments that you can steal away? And sometimes it might be a big moment. It may be that what you need to do and what I need to do, and sometimes I know this to be true, is just be a stronger advocate and protector of myself, my space, my time, and the preciousness of being able to be centered and clear in who I am. There's really no way for me to do my work in the world if I don't do that. I will be doing only partly my work, and I will be sort of mushed together with somebody else's work, like coming through me. And that's not my intention. So part of it is around being like a little bit more ruthless around that. And I use that word purposely because I think people, they're too soft when it comes to their own needs. And that does not serve the collective. That does not serve them. It doesn't really serve anybody, in my opinion. I'm not talking about rugged individualism, just to be clear. But another way that I love to take alone time, even when it's just little tiny bites, is just through connection to my senses, all of my senses. And I love saying there's way more than 5 senses. There's way more than 6 senses. There's like, depending on what you read, there's upwards of like 50 human senses when we think about like our ability to recognize where we are located in physical space and balance and all of these other things, right? I like to talk about the 6 senses, which is like the sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, and then more like the intuitive sense, like, and that can mean many different things, but something that is crossing into a little bit more of the psychic intuitive, taking a moment to really engage in any one of those senses, for me, actually represents a really beautiful bite-sized way to have alone time in connection with myself, because it's not totally alone. You're never alone. You're alone in the world. And for me, alone time, the reason it's so powerful is because it is deepening my sense of belonging in relationship with the whole world around me, not another person, not dependence on my relationship to a person and having my sense of place and self from that, but with the world, with the wilderness, with the dark, with the masses, with the forest, with the ocean, whatever, right? So, one of the ways I love to do that now, there's so many ways, but it's like when I have the instinct to go quickly back to what I was doing, I like to notice that urgency and stop, and instead slow down and see if instead maybe I should turn back around, walk out past the concrete of the driveway and sit down in the grass. Maybe instead of the urgency to come back up immediately to the house after I've been working on chores or getting something done or going down to close the gate, instead of just rushing back up, I turn to the right and I walk through the arbor and I stop and I see if there's any ripe mandarins, and I look at the sun coming through the leaves and I smell the flowers and I pick fruit and I have a piece right there. There's little ways like that. And it generally is that choice of really the noticing of urgency, the noticing of rushing back to be getting further along in my to-do list or working on my business. And they're not necessarily bad things. They're things that I feel lucky to return to. I know I'm very lucky to return to. I love my business. I have changed so much about my life over the past, 10 years, but 6 years, but 2 years. And I don't want to lose my relationship with the world because I'm just rushing into the next to-do list item. And so that's available anywhere. That's available anytime. Maybe it's as simple as when I'm in my room and I've just finished a session, instead of rushing back or getting up or walking back to the living room and re-engaging, I just keep the door closed and I burn a little medicine for 5 minutes and I grab my favorite little miniature music box down off the shelf and I just turn the crank and I play it for myself close to my ear. Like, those little moments for me are like the little bite-sized stolen moments of reconnecting to myself and to the world and my place in it through that solo experience of the senses.
Thank you for sharing that. It really makes it accessible for us to remember that while our journey might seem long and like a marathon, there's those small moments of pause that we can take to continuously reconnect. Now, you talked about your business and how much you love it. What are the offerings that you have for the world right now?
That's a fantastic question. Well, number one, I always have my free Facebook group. It's coming back out as a slightly different theme that is bringing together a lot of the pieces that I've been talking about since I started it. But instead of going from one to the next, it's like they're all finally coming together like in this beautiful cocktail.
What's the name of your Facebook group?
So my current name is the Adventurous and Sensualist Entrepreneur, which obviously doesn't speak to all the things that I teach. I can give you a little bit more of a sense of the flavor of that. But I named it that because I really want to be a place for people who are in that love affair with the world. And I feel like when I say that out loud, it sounds rehearsed and it doesn't really carry like the real emotion that I feel behind it. But like, that is my passion. Like, my biggest love affair of my whole life is with the world, is with experience and travel and culture and sight and sound and taste and smell. And I love contrast. I want to be the place for the people who, maybe they want to go to Paris and roll around in fancy sheets and drink delicious champagne and eat croissant and go to the Louvre. But, they also want to climb mountains and visit, the southern tip of South America and really feel the experiences of being in places that it's not all about the luxury. It's about having this broadness of experience. And some of that is going to be luxury, but some of it is going to be rugged. Some of it is going to be being on that boat in the middle of the cold northern Pacific Ocean and seeing orcas being wrapped up in this big billowy jacket because it's so cold. Like, I want that. And I don't see right now a place online that is really speaking to and representing that community. The people who are entrepreneurs who have that dream for themselves, like, that is part of why they, choose to become entrepreneurs, is because they're trying to create a life for themselves that they know they wouldn't access through the types of jobs that are available or through the way that job culture is, for the most part. I mean, definitely in the United States, like, there's no guaranteed time off. How are you going to go have all these life-altering, heart-exploding experiences if you get 2 weeks off a year, if you're lucky? And then you may not be lucky enough to even take it because you have so much extra work. I mean, that is the space that I'm creating online. It's been going for a while now. It's free. I give tons of free, really high value content. I actually think it's funny when people talk about like, we need to remember to serve and then sell. Don't forget about having really, strong skills. I've heard different people say stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't even fathom that because I come so strongly from service. And I know why they say it because other people, there's a lot of energy out there that kind of misses that part. But for me, like I come so strongly from service, there's basically no useless content in my group. It's like not a thing for me. I think I would bore myself far too much if I did that. I would have to have somebody else do it for me because I'd be like, ugh, I can't look at this. It's boring the crap out of me. Right now, I will be releasing a new group program coming up in the next couple of months, which is going to be really about creating our own new archetype identity that we're stepping into, kind of along the lines of like Sasha Fierce, like who is your power archetype for yourself? Because what I've noticed is when we have a really strong vision of our identity, we get really boxed in by it. And our identities are not fixed. They're just not. They're created in the context of culture. They are habits a lot of the time. Sometimes they're an overgrown version of the trauma that we experienced, and it's become like our identity, right? So that's going to be coming out soon. That is called Alter Ego, ALTAR. Don't steal it if you're listening. I'm going to be the one. Really excited about that. I've been working on that for months, and I've been thinking about it for like 8 months at this point. And then another offering that I have is really just one-on-one high-level mentorship. And I call it mentorship. It is coaching, but it's not only coaching. I call it mentorship because that is really what I do with my clients. I never give people, this is the strategy you follow. Just check these 5 boxes and then move on and check the next. I'm frequently teaching my clients high level coaching and client skills right alongside the process of building your own strategy and really coming to know and redefine yourself in a way that drives your business strategy, that you are creating a unique business strategy for the work that you are doing, your thought leadership, and what you are creating in the world, because how you teach it is part of the leadership and something that is sustainable and exciting and vitalizing. So you are not bored. So you are not burnt out. So you are not just like dragging this anchor of a business behind you being like, they said this was the way. And you're like, but it doesn't feel like the way. It feels like a slog. And that one-on-one mentorship is something that people definitely need to talk to me about. It's not just like a point and click type of thing. It is really important to me to have it be the right fit. And I love working with people in that container because we can go so deep. People, who they are transforms who their ideal client is, how well they understand their work. Like one of my favorite things is when I'm working with somebody and maybe we'll be working on copy. Maybe we'll be designing a program. Maybe we'll be talking about an ideal client or a new container. I reflect back to them like, this is what you do. This is the power of your work. This is what it seems like you're creating. And they cry, they get goosebumps. They're just like, oh my God, my work is so powerful. That is a moment that I love. I love to see people recognize their own power and just be able to pour out something that doesn't quite feel cohesive and have it given back, and then being like, I don't really know how to articulate things. And I'm like, well, this is what you just said to me. And they're like, damn, I guess I do know how to talk about things, but I have a story that I don't. I have a story. I don't know who I am. I don't know who I serve. I don't know what I want, whatever, that I'm not clear enough in my message. So my work is empowerment work. It's courageous. It is at the intersections of spirituality and business. It's inescapable. Even the people who I don't talk about spirituality with, it's holding the container every time.
Well, one of the things that you do weave in and offer to your clients is a shared moon ceremony that gets done twice a month. And you are amazing in that moon ceremony. You can check out our Patreon since Rose and I do it together. But you are excellent in leading people through meditations. And I was wondering if you could just lead us through a quick, like 2 to 3 minute meditation, not 15, just 2 to 3, of kind of a reset of that opportunity to call ourselves back home.
Absolutely. So, this meditation is a meditation that I developed myself from quite a few sources that I use to practice building a home inside myself and really having a sense of belonging that was inside of me as opposed to dependent on people around me. And I think that this is so important when you are coming out of any closet, is really understanding, how do I create a home and belonging inside myself, alongside understanding how to create and find and seek that in the world, which we also need as human beings, of course. So I hope you will enjoy this, and please feel free to modify this practice for yourself if you need to in any way in order to make it useful for you. I would invite you to begin by gently softening your gaze or closing your eyes, whichever is going to allow you to connect to yourself and your own experience while keeping you present in your body as much as possible. Sometimes when we close our eyes, this may help that process, and other times it may actually make us fly away out of our bodies and not stay grounded in the meditation. So I invite you to take a moment and notice what might be true for you today in that regard. May change from day to day, which is why it's so powerful to have a practice of checking in with yourself on a regular basis, as opposed to just taking it for granted. Anytime you do a meditation, even to slow down for that question, do I need to close my eyes today, or do I just need to soften my gaze? Once you have found that choice for yourself, I invite you to begin noticing and listening to your breath and following that breath as you inhale, as though you are following that oxygen down into the lungs of your body, following that breath, which is like the wind as it moves across the surface of the planet. The breath that is entering your body has moved through the leaves of trees and through canyons. It has glided above streams and over oceans. That breath has been breathed by the earth before it is being breathed by you. And as it drops down into your body and your awareness drops down, almost like a physical thing that you could lower from your head and your eyes, bring your consciousness down towards your heart, lowering through your throat, down into your chest, downwards until you find a soft place for it to land, like it is gently sinking to the bottom of a pond and alighting at the bottom. And wherever it lands inside, I invite you to imagine that you are in a beautiful, natural space. It can be a place that you have really been. It can be a place that you dream of going, but it must be a place that you can fill in all of the sensory details, so that as you are landing in this place, which is down inside your body, remember, we are staying grounded in our bodies in this moment. We're not flying away. So bring yourself back. What you are doing is grounding into a piece of earth within your own vessel. Imagine the space around you, like a clearing in the forest inside the heart space of your body. Feeling the ground underneath your hands and your feet. What is the texture of the dirt? What plants are near you? What is the temperature of the breeze and the air? Can you feel the sun? Can you see the moon? What sounds do you hear? What creatures are sharing this space with you? What smells are alive around you? What do you see in this beautiful place? How brightly do the greens vibrate? How warm are the sandy tones? And just take a few moments to notice any other details that bring this into more vivid, textural, sensual experience for you within yourself. And as you breathe, you can even expand this place. Like with every breath, it gets a little bit wider until the space within you is actually expanding past the edges of your body, past the edges of your vessel. The forest does not end at your rib cage. Practice that for just a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, I invite you to reach down and give an acknowledgement to the ground below your feet and to the sky above your head. And then begin following your breath back out of your body, bringing your awareness back to the space that you are in, and returning to your day, to your vessel, and to your present experience. Thank you for that beautiful moment of pause to reconnect, to remember, and allow us the time to slowly step out of the spiritual closet as we reconnect with Mother Earth and all that she is. Thank you. Thank you, Rose, for joining us. Thank you for the offerings that you gave us here today on this podcast, and for the offerings that you are giving and sharing with the world. I hope to see you back here in the circle one of these days, and I'll definitely see you in Moon Circle soon. With gratitude and thanksgiving, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. I hope you'll join us next week back into the circle as we reflect, remember, and reimagine what radical self-love is. Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.